Super cool doomsday story. Floods, extreme cold, high temperatures, earthquakes, tsunamis, insect disasters, acid rain. The female protagonist, who was an orphan, experienced all of the above natural disasters in just 3 years. 60 days after the city was flooded, a long period of hunger led most people to follow Harry and rush up to the 16th floor. It was supposed to be a loan of food, but Jessica and a few others knew that this group of people would not be satisfied. With the advantage of numbers, Harry wanted to take over the 16th floor. At that moment, Harry shouted, "Jessica, I advise you to seriously consider opening the door." His tone was filled with threat. Seeing so many people, Jessica didn't hesitate to pull out her gun and aim it at Harry. Everyone was scared and quickly backed away. Trembling, Harry, who was at the front, said, "Jessica, don't act impulsively. We just came up to borrow some food." Seeing Harry's fearful expression, Jessica disdainfully said, "With people like you, you dare to come up and rob supplies." After saying that, Jessica pointed the gun at Harry's head. Harry was extremely scared at that moment. He didn't even want to be the leader of this floor. Slowly, Jessica's hand moved towards the trigger. Everyone in the hallway became nervous. Suddenly, a scream came from behind the crowd, and then everyone started desperately squeezing into the hallway. People at the back of the crowd kept shouting that someone was killing. Jessica quickly kicked Harry and closed the door, blocking the crowd in the hallway. At that moment, many people collided with the nail-studded iron door, causing screams. Jessica and a few others looked through the small door on the iron door, observing the tragic scene in the hallway. They saw a middle-aged man wielding a kitchen knife, randomly slashing through the crowd. Blood was everywhere. After killing one person with his knife, the middle-aged man shouted, "You scum, all of you go down and accompany my daughter in death." Jim recognized the man. When Jim went out, he heard people downstairs talking about a middle-aged man who was single and had only one daughter. Originally, they relied on the food at home and could hold on for a long time. But one night, suddenly, a group of masked men rushed into the man's house. Not only did they take away the food, but they also insulted the man's daughter. Unable to bear the blow, his daughter jumped out of the window. Not long after, the man went crazy too. After Jim finished speaking, the entire hallway had turned into a slaughterhouse. The people who weren't killed desperately crawled in front of the iron door, calling for help to Jessica. Looking at this insane man, the people on the 16th floor were also terrified. The madman attacked anyone he saw, continuously shouting, "I want all of you trash to accompany my daughter in death." At this point, most of the people were either injured or killed. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, blowing off the man's head. Jessica turned around, and it turned out to be Aster who fired the gun. The middle-aged man fell down with a smile on his face. Ida and the others looked at the tragic scene in the hallway, unable to bear watching any longer. They turned around and went back to their rooms. Jessica and Aster coldly watched the injured people in the corridor. These people knew that Jessica had studied medicine and kept calling for her help. They had already forgotten that not long ago, they had wanted to steal Jessica's food. In the end, Jessica and Aster closed 3 iron doors and returned to their respective rooms. As for the bodies of those killed by the middle-aged man, they were left in the hallway for several days. Eventually, the residents of the 15th floor, who were unhappy, threw them into the flooded downstairs. Since then, the entire community dared to approach the 16th floor because everyone knew the influence. The heavy rain continued, and the flood had already reached the 7th floor. The weather gradually became colder, and Jessica knew that extreme cold weather was coming. Jessica used a fur coat to modify a child-sized one for Amy. She also found temperature-regulating fabric in the space and made 2 warm outfits for the dog and the rabbit on the balcony. During this time, Aster and the others found a reservoir halfway up the mountain that was not yet connected to the flood. However, they couldn't catch any fish because they didn't have fishing equipment. Fortunately, while treating her grandmother, Jessica learned that David and David's parents were both researchers. With David's help, they eventually created a simple fishing device. As long as the device was placed underwater with a diameter of 30 meters, all the fish would be stunned and flipped out of the water. Finally, several people, including David's parents, harvested thousands of kilograms of fish in one day. Due to the inability to preserve them, Aster and the others traded the fish and their leader for food. David's family solved the problem of food. David secretly moved the food back home and hid it. Time passed slowly. The heavy rain had been pouring for 3 months. At noon on this day, the rain became lighter. Everyone cheered. The 3 months of heavy rain had claimed countless lives. Now, it was finally coming to an end. However, Jessica began to worry at this moment because she knew that the rain stopping meant something. Sure enough, Jessica was awakened by the cold that night. Aster's voice came through the walkie-talkie. "Jessica, are you there? The weather is getting colder. Hurry up and put on some clothes," Aster shouted repeatedly. Hearing Aster's concern, Jessica started to like him more and more. But even though Aster was sincere, Jessica dared not reveal her secret. In her previous life, Jessica was pushed down the stairs by Eric and Belle, the people she trusted the most. The painful experience made Jessica remain cautious of anyone. Jessica picked up the walkie-talkie and replied to Aster. She put on the temperature-controlled clothing she bought for $200,000 and then put the dog and 2 rabbits in the living room into the space. Only when they entered the space did the dog and rabbits relax. Jessica quickly put on warm clothing and a fur coat for the dog and rabbits. After completing everything, Jessica led them out of the space. Just as they walked out, they heard an urgent knocking on the door from Aster. Opening the door, Aster stood there wearing a coat. Jessica explained that she was looking for clothes because it was too cold earlier and didn't hear the knocking. Seeing that Jessica was fine, Aster took out a scarf and wrapped it around her. Immediately after, Aster went to wake up Ida and the others. The 3 of them looked at the fur coats and the wardrobe and realized how wise Jessica was, especially Jim, who slept alone. After putting on the fur coat, he wrapped himself in a blanket. Jessica cooked sweet soup for everyone, and they felt a bit warmer after drinking it. Everyone thanked Jessica for buying so many fur coats and cotton jackets, otherwise they would have frozen to death. Aster lit charcoal in the stove, and everyone gathered around to keep warm. Amy was in the middle, looking like a ball of fur between Jessica and Aster. They only heard movement downstairs after a while. It was estimated that many people were not prepared with winter supplies. Ida took out a thermometer to measure the temperature and found that it was minus 19 degrees indoors. Jim couldn't believe it. The temperature dropped from over 20 degrees above zero to minus 19 degrees overnight. The temperature in this city had never been below zero. This was a disaster more terrifying than 3 months of heavy rain. Many elderly people and children froze to death while sleeping. After the shock, the group took their respective stoves and went back to sleep. After closing the door, Jessica took out a battery and 2 electric blankets from the space, one for herself and the other for the dog and rabbit. The next morning, Jessica was once again awakened by Aster through the intercom. It turned out that Aster wanted to bring breakfast. Jessica declined and continued sleeping until noon. The temperature remained at minus 19 degrees without further dropping. During mealtime, Harry came with his group again, just to confirm that Jessica and the others were still alive before leaving. In the evening, the temperature dropped to minus 21 degrees. After taking a hot shower in the space, Jessica looked at the countdown of 145 hours inside the space and felt content. 145 hours represented the 6 days that Jessica could hide in the space when there was a life-threatening situation. It took her 4 months to accumulate this time. Jessica took out some lamb from the space and had a meal before going to sleep. When she woke up again the next day, it was already snowing heavily outside. Jessica felt a bit nervous because she remembered that in her previous life, it was only extremely cold, but there was no snow. Half of the city had already been submerged by floods. If it snowed for a few more months, the entire city would probably disappear. Since her rebirth, Jessica had encountered many things that were different from her previous life. Although there were both good and bad experiences, Jessica knew that all these things happened for a reason. She just hadn't found the reason yet. After having breakfast, Jim called everyone into their room. The water tower on the rooftop had completely frozen, and they needed to find a solution for their water problem. Although there was water in Jessica's space, she pretended to be worried as well. Aster suggested that they collect the snow outside and melt it into water. While it wouldn't be much, it could temporarily sustain them. Everyone agreed, and they put on thick clothes and climbed up to the rooftop. As they opened the balcony door, a gust of cold wind blew onto their faces. Jessica used her scarf to cover her face and took the lead in going outside. The rooftop was particularly large, and the snowflakes had frozen into thin ice from the previous day's freezing temperatures. After a few hours of hard work, they managed to collect enough ice blocks to temporarily solve their water problem. As they returned to the 16th floor, they heard a loud knocking on the door. Ida angrily thought that the people downstairs were coming up again. However, the sound was actually coming from downstairs. Aster explained that Harry was probably leading a team to check the number of survivors and gather the resources from those who had frozen to death. After all, keeping the resources when people were dead would be pointless. Barry said, after months of heavy rain, there's hardly anything left to find. The temperature continued to drop every day, reaching minus 28 degrees. On that day, Grandma came knocking on the door. To thank Jessica, she brought a large jar of fish preserve. Grandma explained to Jessica while crying that it was because of the sudden drop in temperature 2 days ago. Grandma had used the alcohol that Jessica had given her, and that's why the whole family survived. Grandma said she had never seen a temperature of minus 28 degrees in this city in her entire life. Jessica smiled and accepted the fish, expressing her gratitude to Grandma. Grandma continued, although our whole family survived, many young girls next door froze to death. Yesterday, someone had a fever, and that girl came to me asking for medicine. But I didn't have any medicine, and even if I did, I wouldn't lend it to her. Jessica was puzzled by how so many people had died, yet Belle was still alive. Grandma then told Jessica that she felt something big was going to happen in the building recently because Harry, along with his people, broke into the homes of the deceased owners and collected a lot of supplies, including food, clothes, and wooden furniture. However, when Harry distributed the supplies, he treated men better by giving them more, while women had half of their share deducted directly. Many women were resentful about this, but didn't dare to speak up. What's even more terrifying is that Harry has already started contacting the building managers of other units and the criminal organizations outside. Harry took several female college students from the community and openly sold half a kilogram of rice for an hour. When Lucy, a girl on the 12th floor, came back, she almost lost her life. In the end, she only received a little bit of the 5 kilograms of food she exchanged for. Jessica wondered why Harry didn't take Belle out. Grandma said it might be because of Belle's male classmates. Grandma also said that there were black and evil organizations outside that were collecting protection fees for food. If they couldn't pay, young men and women would be taken away for the pleasure of the wealthy. Jessica had seen these people in her previous life, and the authorities had tried to crack down on them several times, but it had no effect. Finally, Grandma revealed the purpose of coming upstairs this time. It turned out that a resident on the 15th floor had frozen to death, and Grandma wanted to move up to live there. Jessica didn't oppose it, but she didn't support it either. Jessica said there were many jealous people on the 16th floor, especially now that resources outside were becoming scarce, so the 16th floor was actually a dangerous place. Jeanshio community was an old community from earlier years, and apart from some college students who were studying, most of the residents were elderly. After being attacked by typhoons, floods, and extreme cold, the entire community probably only had 2 or 3% of the population left. When Jessica was taking Grandma downstairs, she saw a letter for herself on the steps. After being peaceful for so long, what was bound to come finally arrived.